Yeah, good evening, everyone. Warm welcome to our talk today about the topic "We Are Not the Goddesses," and I think it's a topic that really, have heated up some debate, at least online, when Kathleen published the article first on a Substack page, and it's really great to have you all here today, and hopefully we have a bit of discussion and dive a bit deeper into the topic. A few rules up front. Be friendly. That's a golden rule today. I think, especially online, people sometimes get very heated and use language which we don't want to have here. If you have any comments, I suggest you first send it to me in writing. I filter it a bit through and try to combine it a bit so that if a lot of people have the same topics or the same points, we combine them. I might ask people to unmute themselves and to ask a question. If you do that, please have your camera on and ask a question because we don't want to have anyone hiding behind a picture and with not a real name coming and speaking. If you speak, just be prepared. Obviously, everything is recorded today. The recording will be available for all ticket holders for 30 days. And later on, it will be on YouTube. So if you speak, your words will be seen by others. So just be aware of that one. And I think that's the main rules. As I said, any questions, so you can type me a message. I will keep an eye on the chat function. And I think we can start now. So a very warm welcome to Kathleen Matthews and to Imelda Almqvist, who are both well known, and I think you're all here because you have heard about them, read about them, participated in some of their webinars or in-person teachings. They are both prolific writers and really teachers of the old ways of, let's say the West. So the Celtic world, the world of the Norse, the world of the Netherlands. And obviously it's all very connected here. And I think the topic today, "We Are Not the Goddesses," it's really a topic that comes out of that whole area, because I don't think in Asia or so you would have the same level of debate. So very much a warm welcome to all of you. And I think, Caitlin, you wanted to open the circle today. Obviously, you wrote the article that brought us all together here. So maybe I give you the first words.
Indeed, thank you. I just want to welcome everyone and to thank you, Christian, for moderating and for Imelda to join me with the conversation. And all of you, I hope we can sort of all join in together as we're a smaller number, which is great. That means we have more time to speak together. So I just want to begin by just sort of focusing um, this whole session this evening. So I want to start by calling upon all the goddesses who are in our hearts to hear us tonight as we speak. And so we ask them by whatever names they are known to us gathered here, by whatever titles are good to them, that praise and honour may come to them all from this gathering. And I especially call upon the goddesses of wisdom to guide and direct us to speak in ways that are helpful for all to hear, that this talk can be a lantern in the dark, so that it shines on the paths of the soul. So, mothers of wisdom, we ask you to hear us and support us all here, and may we who walk our soul's path always honour and praise you. Good. So, my name is Kathleen Matthews, and I had no really intention to write an article about this, but I was really moved into it because an American media company phoned me up and they wanted me to do a series of talks, and they wanted me to speak as a goddess. I was rendered dumb by this request because it was something I'd encountered in various places, not in my own circles so much, but in those that I've attended when I've been with larger community gatherings. That when people went round the circle, that women in particular would introduce themselves as the goddess whomever, and I would charitably assume that they meant that they were a devotee of that particular goddess. And that's fine in my book. I have absolutely no problem with that. But it sort of came out usually later on in that gathering that the people who had introduced themselves like this really felt they were that goddess. And I don't mean in a, I am the daughter of that goddess or I am the devotee of that goddess, but in the no, I am the goddess and I am here. And so I began to look into this, and the thing that I suppose eventually sparked me to write about this was I just typed in how to be a goddess. I just thought, I'm sure I've seen a book that has that title. I'm just going to just type it in. And sure enough, up came WikiHow. And WikiHow has a whole piece on how to actually be a goddess. And so my mind was kind of into super boggle by this point. And so I was really, really extraordinarily taken with what on earth is going on, because I'm an older person. I'm in my early 70s, and when I was training both in the Western Mysteries, I'm a member also of the Fellowship of Isis, and I also, of course, come from the pre-internet generation. That I had never come across this before. I know of no spirituality on earth where people go around as ordinary human beings saying that they are a divinity. And I could not understand it at all. And Imelda and I began to talk about this, and we decided that it would be great to have a conversation about how we felt about this, what we thought about it, what we thought was causing it. So it's nice to have some other people here to have other insights as well. So Imelda, what was your take on this? Because it is an extraordinary phenomenon.
Well, it is. And when I saw your blog appear, I thought, oh, that's so great you've written that, because it flitted through my own consciousness a few times. There's like something going on, and why are people doing this? I thought, oh, that's great. You nailed it down and you wrote about it. And, you know, I know that some of my students are present here on the call. I see some familiar faces. But I work primarily in the Northern tradition, where it's very, very clear that if you take the role of, say, the vulva, who goes on the high seat, if you do a high seat ceremony, you become a mouthpiece for powers greater than yourself. So, you know, you do oracular work, you bring forth wisdom for your community, or healing, or guidance, or whatever it might be. But under no circumstances would you believe that you are divinity. You're just in the privileged role of performing that office. And, you know, the whole thing about that, it's an act of service on behalf of the community. You never do it for yourself. You do not go and stage a high seat ceremony where you receive guidance for yourself. Even after you have merged with the goddess and spoken, you usually don't remember what you said. It's all for your community. So like the whole point of thinking that, you know, we would be divinity. And then also the knock-on effect that, like, I work very closely with the Norse goddess Skaði, for instance. And I really don't know how Skaði would respond if I go around saying that, not that I work with Skaði or I'm closely affiliated with her, but that I now am Skaði. I think she would lash out at me and it wouldn't end very well.
No, I mean, it is an extraordinary thing. I mean, my training in the Western Mysteries was always that you would step into a role as a priest or priestess. You would speak the words of a divinity or a spirit or other being, and that was your service. That was what you did. But you didn't sort of, you left that exactly where it was and came back into yourself. And there were always procedures within any kind of ceremony that the Fellowship of Isis is particularly good at this. You know, it invokes a divinity upon someone who is to give the oracle. And then at the end, we thank the divinity. We call that person back into their body once again, because obviously this is a role that both men and women can perform, and with no thought of that going away thinking that because you've embodied or represented or spoken for a divinity or a spirit, that that you had become them. And in fact, the only instances where I have previously come upon things like this is where someone has done too much of that work, and when they've had some mental instability or illness, and in the same way that, you know, we used to think in this archetypal way of, you know, people who had delusions of grandeur and thought that they were Napoleon or Jesus or whatever, and that we would treat those people kindly and look after them as well as we might. That was not a good thing for a human being to be doing, because their own humanity sort of went by the by. And I do actually, you know, have had experiences. A long time ago, a friend of mine became very close to a particular set of beliefs and traditions. And he just announced one day, I'm no longer my street name, I am this other person. And his behavior immediately became, well, the only way to describe it is non-human. He became a non-human being. You couldn't talk to him at all. He would not respond. He would cast curses and so forth. Anyone upset him by any means, whether it was taking his parking space or whatever it was. He was very cruel to his girlfriend. It was a terrible thing to see. And I mourn that person. I can't ever talk to him again as an ordinary human being. So, we, all of us, can suffer from mental instabilities of all kinds due to the stresses and strains of modern life. But the taking on of a divinity is something which in the ancient world has always had this terrible, this terrible result, which is, it is a form of hubris that, that comes with its own self-destruct mechanism within it. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, Imelda, or if you've had any experience of people who've gone that way.
I've certainly had experiences of, no, not what you described, thankfully. Though actually in my childhood, there was a family friend of ours, who decided that he was like going to be called and he was going to leave his family and go live in an ashram, and that there was no worries anymore because like everyone would be provided for. And my mother actually took him to task and said, if you leave for an ashram in India, you've got 3 children under the age of 10. So everything being taken care of, that's just going to be your wife becoming a single parent and doing double the work. Can you not see how irresponsible this is? And he was like, no, God looks after us all. It's all a matter of trust. You just drop into trust. And off he went to India. So I suppose that's the closest I've come to that, and that was in childhood. But I was also very much as a person who's interested in languages, and I love learning languages. In one of your essays on Substack, Kathleen, you wrote about how there is a kind of, within the language we use, a kind of shifting of tectonic plates. If we enter a collective agreement that it's now like okay to use language like that, or it's okay to identify as a deity, it calls into question a lot of the words we have traditionally used, because words lose their shape and definition. And if you put it, the tectonic plates start shifting or rubbing up against each other. And then, as you put it, there are like very, very, well, almost like toxic splinters that enter reality because we cannot trust our sense of reality anymore. Would you say a bit more about that, please?
Oh, I think so. I mean, my sense is that, if people who are practicing this, I'm not quite sure what to call it, but people who are living a life as a divinity, and they are teaching other people, then what does it do to the teaching experience? Because if superbia and hubris come into the teaching, then the humanity is not there. And then we have this this problem that the autocracy, self-aggrandizement, this kind of very unstructured identification with divinity, it ultimately can be very harmful, and people are on the receiving end of it, as with my friend who was himself taken away in this kind of direction, and the people who who he was teaching or leading and inspiring, themselves became very confused, and he was very frightening to be with, because he would also be very violent. So it was a very very difficult thing. So I think that we have this problem of, I suppose we can say, at the beginning of this, how do we know that a divinity or a spirit has visited us and is calling us? Because I mean, just before this this evening, I just received a note from someone who made it quite clear that someone was telling her to do all sorts of things in a sort of in the form of goddess teaching, which did not seem right to me. And I thought, well, what exactly is going on here? Who is doing what to whom? And there was a sense of, she had a demanding attitude. She wanted this initiation or that initiation, and she was fed up with some other people who had been teaching her. And I just thought, hang on, what's going on here? And I realized that she was shopping. She was shopping for the thing that she wanted, and it's the thing we cannot do when it comes to our spiritual traditions, because our spiritual tradition calls us, the divinities or the spirits of that tradition call us. It's not that we suddenly wake up one day and decide we're going to be apprenticed to the goddess Diana because we rather like the look of her. It doesn't work that way round. We are, and we see this problem as in shamanism as well, where people sort of say, oh, I seem to have a shrew as a power animal. And it's like they really wanted an eagle or a bear, but it has not shown up for them. And it's not like they can sort of go off to Harrods and buy what they want. And so we're seeing, I think, what happens when spirit traditions meet advertising, commodification and commercialism, which is very difficult. So I know you have more to say on that.
Well, I mean, as some people may know, I've been writing a series of blogs like exploring how narcissism is becoming deeply wired into our culture, and I will not repeat all the arguments I made in those essays. But I think the point I really want to get to is how transformative it is when we work with powers greater than ourselves, and how it is a path of service, but also how I know that many of my students have had their ultimate transcendent experiences when we've done either high seat work, temple work, deity work, whatever it may have been. These are experiences that people remember for life. And that's why it feels so important to me to safely host and offer those experiences. And I think the moment that I think I am the god or goddess, the power of deity and a power greater than myself to completely transform my life. And a lot of that, I know from my own story, is the sort of dismantling of ego, to really sort of step into that path where I'm in service to the way that, in my case, the Norse gods called me to run I'm talking to you all from Sweden. So to start a forest school here in Sweden, in the middle of the forest by the lake. And, for me, that whole journey has been an endless letting go of what my egoic desires for myself were and what my plans were and all of that. So, it's beautiful work and blessed work, but there's a kind of ego death built into that. And that's another thing that shouldn't be underestimated, both, how it's utterly transformative, but also it is a path of hard knocks. And where does that energy and that need go the moment that I identify as a goddess? I imagine it's going to sort of seep out in other ways. So I'm struck by what you said about your friend, how he was being violent and horrible to his girlfriend and would cast curses on people who took his parking space. I mean, that's a kind of misdirection of energy in some ways, possibly. Yeah. What do you think?
Certainly. Well, I think that being chosen, I looked at a couple of things that I wanted to quote because I think they're kind of very relevant to this, because I feel that each of us already stand in a kind of tribe, if I can put it that way, and we do recognize each other as being people of that tribe. And, you know, the reason for that is we kind of already stand in the school of that spiritual being, whoever it is, whether it be a goddess or a spirit or whatever. And one of the Hermetic texts, the Kore Cosmo, which was translated by Anna Kingslake at the end of the 19th century, it's a Hermetic text from the Hellenic Egyptian period. And it talks about how souls take various colorations, and it's sort of a dialogue between Isis and her son. And part of the text says, you know, when the ministering angels and the genii, the spirits appointed, are warlike, then the soul in their charge takes that character, forgetting its own, or rather laying it aside until some future change of condition. But if the spirits are of a gentle order, then the soul follows its path in peace. If they are friends of judgment, the soul loves to judge. If they are musicians, the soul sings. And if they love truth, the soul is that of a philosopher. And so the souls necessarily follow the teaching of their guardians, which I think is a very useful text for us, because I know when I speak to a lot of people who are coming into that work, and I say, well, you know, you could light a shrine to, you know, the spirit or divinity that calls you, and they say, well, I don't know who they are, you know. And it's like, well, that's good, you know, how do we recognize the divinity of our heart, you know, the one that leads our soul, or maybe it's more than, you know, one being. How do we find that out? And I think that's a really important question to begin with, because there's usually, my sense of this is that even though we may not be able to immediately define it, it's a bit like the song from South Pacific. You know, we come into a museum and see an artifact, we go into a forest and we see a tree or an animal, whatever it is that's calling, or we're reading a book, and then it's kind of somewhere across a crowded room, you know, and suddenly there's a, you know, like this, because it's like a bolt of lightning. It immediately, when you love someone, when you fall in love with a spirit in that sense, you know, it was already seeing you, so it's that sort of linkage is already there, and it's wonderful. If we just look at those things, they're kind of, I think, really helpful to discover where it is our soul is being led. But another quotation I just wanted to, it's from India. It's the Vastu Sutra Upanishad, and it says something very interesting. It's a particular form of Hindu spirituality. It says, from the contemplation of images grows delight, from delight, faith, from faith, steadfast devotion. Through such devotion arises the higher understanding that is the royal road to enlightenment. And then it says, without the guidance of the images, the mind of the devotee may go astray and form the wrong imagination. Which is a very interesting thing, because my sense with the, you know, we are really goddesses problem is that there is not good modeling. We come through a tradition which has broken parts to it. Part of it comes down to us in a very natural way, but the parts that were what I call the essential guidance of those systems and beliefs did not necessarily come with it. And part of our job over the last 100 years or more is to learn, what are the nuts and bolts of this? How do we do this? We don't have the teachers standing behind us. The teachers that stood behind me were people who had to go into quite dimly lit rooms to go into their lodge. They had to wear robes and they had to wear something over their heads to hide who they were, because they had come through a tradition where people could not be seen to do this work. We are so lucky that we can, you know, we can stride out to the nearest park, meet up with some friends and do something in the park or on a hillside or whatever. But people did not do that. They had to do that very, very secretly. And that does things to a tradition. So So I think that what we need is good modeling and good understanding and practical work with each other. What say you?
No, I agree with that absolutely. And I think another point I want to acknowledge is how human beings need community. You know, women need sisterhood, men need brotherhood. We also need to have mixed gatherings where, you know, all permutations are possible. But I think a thing I would also wonder if the moment that I believe I'm a goddess, you know, like my connection to other human beings is tarnished. So I think that whole, as well as what you just say about, like, you know, like being a role model, and also frankly demonstrating safe ways that this is done. There are like safe and not so safe ways of connecting to a goddess or a deity or a higher power and bringing them forth. And as you already said earlier, there are also ways of closing that work, so it stays in sacred space, and then you close the sacred space, and then there is the work of bringing people, you know, down to earth or back to earth. But I also just want to acknowledge the fact that the need for community and also the need for unity consciousness, both a unity consciousness of a well-run, safe group where people truly belong and are truly witnessed on the level of soul, I think is as important as having that personal connection to divinity, which is not the same thing as being divinity, but like also being witnessed by divinity and feeling that there is that open line of communication. So these are all really important pieces as well, I feel.
Yeah, because I think, you know, we need that personal connection that comes to us. We need a place where that spiritual divinity can be acknowledged and honored, which could be just a small shrine, you know, could be a whole temple if you had it, but and then it's like we need a regular practice that has rites, devotions, whatever, which are based on the story, the myth, the deep core teaching of that being. But the community that we need, you know, the community where we can share that honoring, I think is really important, because I think part of this is, you know, a real problem that people don't see. I think in one of the posts that I did following the initial one, I mentioned the time when I was working with an American student, and we went out to Avebury, and I'd been teaching her privately, but the other members of her class who had come to the university at Oxford to pick up on an education that they'd missed out on, they were also having a little trip around the south of England. And there she and I were, and she wanted to be initiated. It was very clear she was a woman of devotion. And we stood in the middle of Avebury's South Circle. And then the coach turned up. We'd gone in my car, but the coach with her fellow students came, and they all rolled out of the coach. They literally rolled down the henge. They behaved like gibbons on holiday. They climbed on the stones. It was woohoo and way, and off they went. And of course, she just sort of stood there, kind of completely frozen, and went, oh, like this. And I kind of thought, oh my. And I said, look, they won't do that when they go to Salisbury Cathedral.
No.
Because we all know what happens at Salisbury Cathedral. You know, every single person, even if they're not Christian, has seen pictures on television of what happens in a church and how people behave and what's done, even though they may not understand all of it. But they don't have a sense of, when you go to one of these great sacred sites like Avebury, of how you behave, what you do, what is possible. And the fact that it's perfectly nice to sit down and have a picnic with the ancestors, that's fine. I have no problems with that. But sort of behaving in that disrespectful way, no one would expect, you know, these students to go climbing up the pillars and, you know, sticking gum. There was no way that that would happen, because people have a natural respect for what happens in a church. But we've lost those kinds of understandings. And so what is normal or customary? Part of that is just general good manners, in the same way that we would shut a gate in the country so that the animals don't get out of the field. And some part of that is just doesn't recognize where they are. It's the invisible to them.
Yeah, and it goes back to the modeling again. I know that some young people, especially if they've never been to church, I think a lot of people have reacted against a churchy or Christian upbringing by saying, I'm not passing that on to my children. That's understandable in many ways. But you then have like children for whom how we are in relationship with the sacred and how we show reference, that's just not been modeled in any way. And that's why I've often made the case for children having some kind of spiritual toolkit. It almost doesn't matter like what it is, but that children are like wired for spirituality. So that's one of the topics I go on to sometimes. A week ago, I was at one of the most famous, it's not a circle, it's actually in the shape of a ship.
Yes.
Megalithic monuments here in Sweden, which is Skaði, and you have two of these ships together, so they almost look like a lemniscate. And I was high up on the grave mount of Kun Anand, and there was this teenager on an all-terrain bike that just sort of came, and he was I was looking down from the mount. I was high up, and I actually filmed it. And he was entertaining himself by just cycling on his all-terrain bike, like around the stones. He went around the ship a few times, then he went through it, and he wasn't actually harming the stones. He wasn't sort of spray painting graffiti on or whatever. But it still was a very, very jarring thing. I was sitting out on the mount, was sort of gazing at this, monument from the Stone Age, was dwelling on the people that might be buried in the grave mount I was sitting on. And suddenly this teenager on a bike comes. And it was like two realities that didn't add up. But also, like, how is this boy to know if he lives nearby and that's been his playground? And I said, I have no problem with children playing in stone circles or in stone ships. To me, children playing is a form of prayer. But clearly this young man, for him it was just like part of the local scenery, and it's a place where you go to entertain yourself on your bike. So, yeah. But how would he know if he's never been told differently?
No, exactly. In the same way that, country people don't know what to do in the town either, I mean, it's like they don't have those instincts that people have in urban areas. So, it's not a matter of shame or anything of that sort. It's just that, there hasn't been a reception of a good showing of something so that it can be helpful. And I think it has been difficult. I think we can't look back over the last 1.5 years in the West without seeing we've had a few problems. And that to be able to express and live and work with the spiritual traditions of our ancestors, and also to pick up on the new currents which are also coming through, for our time now. Because it isn't that things have to be traditionally set in stone. We don't have to do things like they did in ancient Greece. We don't have to do them exactly. But the people who have been doing this for the longest time in unbroken succession are people like Hindus, for whom the goddess has never gone away, and the goddess has always been there. And she's greeted every morning, every domestic Hindu shrine that prasad is given, offerings are given to the divinities on the shrine. And each household will have different kinds of things. But I mean, to be a Hindu, you could be someone who worships a tree, or you could be someone who right at the other end does the whole temple panoply and believes in the Trimurti, the three aspects of divinity. And who knows all the theological, mystical background of that. But they are both Hindus, yes, which is, so there is a wonderful variety and unity all at the same time. That there is a service to the earth which is incumbent upon everybody. That you honor the divinities, you honor other living beings, living human beings. And the ancestors, and that you read the Vedas, you read the sacred texts. So, you know, those 5 things are incumbent upon all Hindus. And if they don't do anything else but do those 5 things, then, you know, they're doing the best they can. So it's very interesting to, you know, to think about what are the sort of the foundational things that that we need in our society. If we exercise our brains about that, you know, what are the 5 things that would be the basics of that? And I think it's a very interesting question to try and answer, because, you know, those who have come before us have given certain things into our hands. Some things we have discovered ourselves through personal revelation. There are lots of academics who can translate all the languages in the world and give us lots and lots of good guidance. But a text without someone to live the text is a difficult thing, isn't it? And we can see how from biblical Christianity, how that can lead to a variety of very literal-minded readings, which then, you know, will say, you know, well, this group are completely holy and wonderful people. I remember a wonderful story. I was watching a program about the Amish, so the people who came from Germany to America after European persecution. And there were 2 guys in this community, and they were very interested in being able to read the Bible, which they couldn't read because it was only in Middle High German. And they didn't read Middle High German because they were American Amish. And so they'd crept off and gone to a Bible study group nearby where their community lived, and they went to read the Bible. And they came back, and the interviewer had clearly said, "So what did you make of reading the Bible?" And one man looked at the other and he said, "Well, I've read it from cover to cover, and you know, Johan, there was no mention of not being able to wear red braces on my trousers."
Wow.
And it's kind of like, when we get to this level of silliness, obviously, you know, the sacred text has gone into a ditch. This is not a car that you can drive anymore. Or we need better teachers.
But I actually think it's one of the most important questions of our time, I think, spiritually speaking, and also in terms of we are to have more unity between all the different faiths and belief systems. If we could agree on 5 or however many, it doesn't need to be the, you know, the 10 commandments, but, you know, like, what are those foundational principles? But then there is also the importance of honoring that new generations and younger people are going to do things differently from the way we do. And that's really, really important, that new lifeblood and new ways coming in, because that's how the tradition stays fresh and alive. So I want to make it very clear that I try to teach with the highest level of historical accuracy I can. That's why I teach myself languages and I read silly amounts of books. But I also sort of, you know, like, try to get the context right, and after that I hand it over to the students in direct revelation. But like, always that balance between what the ancestors did and what we did, and realizing that our children will do things differently. But what are those foundational principles?
What are those foundational things? Yeah, I think they're really important to discern and to live by. And I want to be very controversial and say that that whatever divinity you're following, you know, if it's a god or a goddess or a spirit, whatever it is, that, you know, that it's for all. You know, the divinity did not come for one set of people only. It came for all. And so that means that everyone is welcome. And I know that, you know, in the, because of the kind of history we have behind us, the position of women, the absence of the divine feminine from free and full understanding has caused very many problems. And so I see that, you know, that at some point a lot of dressing up and self-glorification has come into the worship of the goddess. But you know, in ancient times that would have been for the divinity. We would have dressed the divinity. We would have taken the clothes off the image of the divinity and washed them and put some fresh ones on. But now it's people doing it to them for themselves. And it's, people to whom I've spoken have said, well, this, we really are all divine. And it's like, yes, we are of the divine. We belong under the umbrella of our, whatever our tribal, understanding of divinity is. And we may mediate divine things in the sense that we speak to someone who's very deeply upset. We may comfort an animal that's dying and sit with it and give it some water. We may do all the things that compassionate human beings do when they're at their very, very best. Which is that, but that's for, we don't exclude, one group from another. So the divinity is for all. Even those divinities that say in Rome, Bona Dea was only worshipped by women, and men were very respectful of that, and they didn't come in and push in on those rights in the same way that men did lots of things with Mithras and women weren't usually invited. And so there were always those kinds of exceptions to these things, that there's men's business and there's women's business. And I think and that's exactly, what Aboriginals call it. They know that these things are special to different kinds, and culturally these are different throughout the world. But that we are all included and we are all embraced. So our spirituality has to also be able to do that, or it's some kind of exclusive club. Like the London clubs at the moment, like the Garrick Club, which has been a men's club since the 18th century, has now just opened to women. Garricks for writers and actors and people like that. But I don't think I particularly want to join, but you know what I mean? At least you can now. So I think that's, for me, that would be the main basis of our sort of things. But maybe this is time to sort of call in some others to talk about this, as we're a small group, so it would be very interesting. There may be questions that have come up, and we can come back to this. It would be great to address those, but maybe Christian, you could mediate some of those to us and ask the people who have asked them to please.
Irene wanted to ask a question, so probably I let her ask the first question. Irene, are you there?
Is that Erin? Yeah.
Yeah, me. Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't realize I was still on mute. Yeah, so just I began really reading into goddess spirituality, goddess religion, and the divine feminine, all of this stuff for a year after realizing that Christianity, I was just really missing something. But I have been raised Christian, and it's still something that's very important to me. And I think if I hadn't had that and I'd just gone into paganism as an atheist, I think I see now a lot of people who, there's not a lot of genuine theism anymore, if that makes sense. It just kind of seems to be almost a game to some people, where we talk about these deities and things the kind of our co-workers or our friends, or it's just or celebrities almost, and it's just this idea of every woman is a goddess. And I go to a lot of these kind of new age divine feminine events, and I get a lot out of them in the sense that as we were saying earlier, spiritual community is so important, and I am quite an extroverted person, and I do like to be around other people and have those connections. However, I just always feel a little bit out of place in them, because there's people who almost look down on me for being theistic and for not I've had, there's people who've posted Facebook statuses we need to stop worshipping these gods because we are the gods. And I know, and I always get kind of paranoid, is this kind of a little bit about me, or I don't know. It's do you agree? I feel the genuine actual theistic polytheism and like, kind of theistic goddess worship especially is quite rare, because it's often like either like a feminist thing or like a kind of like a self-empowerment thing. It seems to be quite rare to genuinely meet people who do actually like worship like the goddess and or individual gods and goddesses. And yeah, it's interesting because I read a lot of like books by older people in the community that kind of started in like the 70s and 80s, like the big pagan like revival movement, especially the goddess movement. And it never seems that it was like that initially. Like it was quite theistic and it was taken quite seriously. So I guess like, would you agree that it seems quite rare now to meet people who genuinely believe, like have got this theistic belief in like the goddess or the divine feminine, as opposed to like a feminist like empowerment thing? And I guess where would I begin to like look to find other people who do actually worship, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of everyone I know. In my case, I mean, most of the people I hang out with, that's normal, and they are everything from what one would call monotheist goddess worshippers through to polytheists, people who have belief in spirits and who work very closely and respectfully with them. So, yeah, for me, it's normal. It's and of course I know that that's a generational thing, because as I said, I come from the pre-internet generation where we used to actually meet up and do these things together, and in fact a lot of us still do. We haven't stopped meeting together. So getting into any of those circles when I was younger was very difficult, because we were still in the 60s and 70s, still pulling out of this, everything has to be secret, because, if someone knows you're a bank manager, you could lose your job kind of thing. But the modern experience, which younger people have had, is not one that I've had. So only those who've come from that, from that can tell me how it is now, because I know a lot of things are online and not in person, and some of the things that are in person are not very well held or focused. So what do you say, Imelda?
Well, I know I'm a little younger than you. I'm in my 50s, but I've been reflecting a lot recently about, generational matters, that I realize I'm sort of starting to be at the older end of things. And I must say that, my courses like happening on different continents still filled with people who are like old style. I'm sure it's my energy signature that attracts these people. But, I taught a really large group in Wisconsin just a month ago. 27 people in that class. And people were so completely ready. They were so taken by the high seat that after we closed it for the evening and I went to bed, I still heard them at it. The students just went back in and they kept going because they couldn't stop. They were so taken by the power of the experience. And I was lying in bed thinking, should I join them? And I thought, no, I need to teach again tomorrow. I'll stay in bed. So I'm very much aware that there are because who I am, and I'm quite outspoken. I'm Dutch. I'm quite outspoken about what I stand for. So I know I'm going to attract people who sort of a priori, believe in what I'm doing. But I am more and more wondering about, there must be a whole large group of people that I'm not encountering and not seeing. I see little glimpses of it on social media. But there we're dealing with algorithms creating the echo chamber experience for all of us. So that it creates a kind of bubble experience where we think that, we're connected to an endless number of people who think and perceive things the way that we do, which I know is not true in reality. So I'm at that point right now, Kathleen, where I'm both actively talking to young people as much as possible. It's something I've always done. And also actively trying to educate myself about other perspectives or, what other age groups believe, because I'm aware that I'm quite possibly operating in a huge bubble. And that's an issue. I think I would like to be educated while still holding on to the foundational principles that inform what I do.
I mean, I've belonged to a group that for the last 34 years has done met together for a ritual every month. you know, which has been a wonderful experience and a great privilege, mostly with the same people, but people have got older and died, and some new people have come in, and so on. So it's sort of, you know, that's all still going on. I think one of the things that, you know, that the meeting together is easy for people like Christians and Hindus and others because they have dedicated real estate.
Yeah.
Most of us, we have the domestic home, which is generally not very big in this country. And so meeting up and doing things together is quite difficult unless you hire a hall or whatever, and then you have to beautify, have the meeting, you know, take everything away with you, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Or you meet up in nature, which again, in the Northern Hemisphere, is not always terribly comfortable when you want to be together to do things. So I think, you know, the meeting place and the opportunity to meet together is really important too. And how we do that, I think, is something we also would need to look at.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. Christian, are there other questions or perspectives? I want to make sure we honor as many questions and perspectives as possible tonight.
Yeah, there was one question about someone who said she's curious about the intersection with the kink and BDSM community and goddess worship, because of the role of a goddess is that women take on an aspect of dominance here. And how do you see something there? How is that from your perspective? That dominant role that you put into your alter ego?
I mean, I don't know the exact question, but but my sense of it, you know, is that that gods and goddesses are for everyone, and so I don't see why one gender or another gender should have dominance, because the goddess is for everyone, as gods are for everyone. And from my perspective, I've always worked with mixed groups of people. I mean, I was trained for the theatre, so I've seen every stripe of gender, believe me, before it was fashionable to be so. And everyone's a person, and so everyone has always been very welcome at anything that I do, as long as the behaviour is good for everyone and is, you know, and is considerate for everyone. So, I mean, you know, men worship goddesses too, and you know, if we think about the mystery cults of the ancient world, you know, everybody, men, women, grandparents, children, slaves, citizens, non-citizens, all kinds of different people came to the Eleusinian mysteries, in which Demeter and Persephone are the main central deities of that worship. And it wasn't just corralled, you know, for women, it was for everyone. And I would still hold that.
Hi, it was my question actually.
Please, yes,
yes.
give it to us again.
Thanks for your response. It's not quite what I was meaning really. So I think I am just really curious, because in the kink community, goddess worship's quite a big thing, and like dominant women will take on the role of goddess, or they will call themselves a goddess, and any gender of person might worship that woman as a goddess, but it is not. And there's different kind of interpretations of it. Like some goddesses will think of it as some kind of spiritual practice, but for others it's more about taking on a dominant role, or as a woman or female feminine person. So I just found it really curious when this talk came up about this kind of intersection between these different worlds, and this kind of different kind of grasping after the power of the feminine, perhaps. Yes.
I think that is what came to my mind because I heard BSM. So you know, and I think that's what you said, Christian. That's what you meant. And you know, it is very much my belief that something that has been ancestrally wired into us, and that's like part of our human needs and condition. If that's not being met by society, we live in a very secular society. We've already talked about how, you know, Western culture is predominantly Christian, and that's all like fading out. But it is my belief that these needs we have for like transcendental experiences, and also in terms of power, while being at the receiving end of power and the administering end of power, I believe that's deeply wired into the human condition. So like I'm only guessing because I'm not an expert on this, but to me what makes sense is that people are not going to find it in their like places of worship or in their regular everyday communities. Then it's going to seek its expression in other ways. So I'm not surprised to hear that this would be going on. But you then also have the issue of if it's not done in sacred space and it's not done as a proper ceremony, then what kind of energy is going to be about that? Is going to sort of gather around that? Like
Yes,
Amanda,
is
I
it?
can't see you. Oh, here, Tara, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting because a lot of goddesses will charge a tithe, like they'll charge money to be worshipped, and it's kind of some interesting things around that. And I've seen some goddesses from like black women who will be looking to take a tithe from white men, which is kind of, I find really interesting to kind of try and write some of their experiences of racism, like in America and in the West. It's quite interesting. I just find it really fascinating and interesting as a spiritual person as well to be coming into a space where there is this fetish of worshipping a goddess.
And I think that I can really see why it happens. I even think it's very important that it happens. Like my only issue would be if you're going to do it in like commercial space or entertainment space, then the boundaries that Kathleen and I would put around our work, if you know our students and communities like would not be there. So like I'm not saying I'm like against it or I don't think it is wrong, because I think it's something that very genuinely seeks expression, and I think that needs honoring and exploring, and I'm all for that. But my big issue would be with the boundaries placed around that, and if the safe sacred space is not held around that, like where that's going to end up. Like if there are no like boundaries and it's not done in sacred space, is it always going to end well? And I don't attend those things, so I don't know. You probably know more about it than I do.
Leads probably to another very great question here around probably the role also. I mean, when we look at goddess worship, it seems to me sometimes it's one goddess picked, but obviously in most traditions it's not one goddess, it's part of a wider pantheon, and you also have a lot of interaction with other actors in that pantheon, especially with male energy. So Kathleen, you mentioned Demeter and Persephone, but also there's a lot of interaction with Hades, who then obviously abducted and all that came through that. So if you just pick one goddess but leave the other aspects of that pantheon out of it, don't you distort the view a bit and just pick and choose some aspects, like a Hollywood caricature of the, like Thor with his golden hair? I mean, you never see the Thor of a Marvel Studios kick a dwarf into the fire because he's angered by the dwarf being in front of his feet, like you have in the Eddas. So is there an issue here of just pick and choose and leave the rest out? And where's the male energy in that?
But I think, you know, divinity takes very many different forms, and even one divinity may take lots of different strands of and appearances. I think Persephone is very interesting in the sense that, you know, we have the young woman end of her story and her mythos, but then, you know, she comes into this other half of her story with being, you know, the wife of Hades and the one who looks after the dead and who receives the dead. And in fact, you know, one of the major parts of that cult was about when we die, we want Persephone to be on our side, please. You know, which was a very human requirement, that, you know, you didn't go to hell or to a dark, twittery, ghosty place. You came to the mercy of Persephone, who would let you out, so that you would. So this was part of the lesser mysteries, was to do with that very early part of her myth of being taken to Hades, and Demeter's grief and her coming back again, and the earth flowering and blooming. But the other half is about, you know, how we come back from the dead, which is an incredibly important story, and all the gods and goddesses who enact that story, you know, who are, you know, Hecate, Hermes, they're all part of that as well. So I think, you know, the myth of a divinity or a spirit is a very important part of the load-bearing understanding that we as humans have, and our participation in that story is the thing that brings us so near to them. You know, I personally have a really deep devotion to Mabon, who is the son of the mother, in the British tradition, and that's been with me all my life. And yet different aspects of that myth have shown themselves to me, and are still doing so. So, you know, I don't think we come from this sort of one place, but the pick and mix, which is very often leveled at polytheists. You know, oh, you're just pick and mix as you go out, and as I have some from that jar and something from that jar. Thank you. Is not true. If you come and have a look at it a bit closer, I think, you know, you find a unity that that these stories that come with the divinities do work through us, but identifying with those divinities and those stories, so that you kind of try and work them out almost like a chessboard movement in some formal way. That way madness lies.
But I also think that where the whole pick and mix thing comes in is that I think for me it matters less which belief system you choose, or, you know, the deity calls you. As far as I'm concerned, I don't believe you get to choose the deities we work with. But I think once you do that choice in itself is going to bring discipline. Like, you know, you can choose like any sort of deity in the Norse. Well, you can debate whether it's a pantheon. Academics have discussions about it. But from the Norse group of gods. And I think the issue then is not to say, well, I do a bit of work with Odin or Thor or Tyr or whatever it might be. And then when something is asked of you that is like a true sacrifice, or that's truly difficult or brings great discomfort, to then be like a butterfly and hop somewhere else and start all over again. So for me, like the pick and mix thing is, it's not so much about who you choose or what you choose, but it's about once you make that commitment of a choice. But that's to say, again, to me, the tradition calls me, the gods call me, it's the other way around. But once I answer that call, it's not only to stick around for what's immediately pleasing or what strokes my ego or what is comfortable, but I think the real educational part, the real initiatory part, lies in sticking with the things that are going to be asked of me that will first go against the grain, or that frighten me witless, or that are going to mean sort of sacrificing all the security I held so dear in life. You know, that to me, I think, and that's where the pick and mix should not be happening. That's just my take.
Thank you. We have a next question from Susanne. Suzanne.
Thank you. Oh, thank you both. Thank you all so much. This is so interesting. So here's the question. Many pagans are moving ever deeper into an animistic-based spirituality, and you can begin to see how there's starting to be, you know, a mix between a sense of divinity and creation. So my question is, and I'm particularly interested in your personal experiences, if you don't mind, what is the place of divinity in that worldview? Or to put it another way, how to disentangle the divine from an animistic philosophy of unity in creation? Thank you.
We need a Hindu. Where's a
Yeah.
Hindu when you need one? Do you want to go with that, Imelda?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it harks back to something we were talking about divinity earlier. We're like talking about connecting with divinity and acknowledging divinity, but not saying we are a god or a goddess. And to me, you know, like animism also teaches that everything that is, from the smallest creatures, and not just the creatures, even like rivers and features in the landscape and elementals and weathers, like everything that is has like indwelling spirit. And for me, that means it also has indwelling divinity, because it is all part of that larger whole. So it has that kernel or grain divinity within it. So to me, it's not, how do you say, to me that like is in unity, because to me, seeing, also connecting from the divinity that is in me to the divinity that is to everything I encounter, be it a tree or an ant or a bear or a wolf, or even a beautiful piece of wood or a twig or a leaf or a flower that opens this time of year. You know, that reminds me of the sort of ultimate divinity, or that sense of wholeness that connects everything. So for me, these are all like invitations where that whole larger web of life, which for me is an ultimate web of divinity, becomes visible. That would be my answer to that.
Thank you. It's a great question. I mean, my mind is drawn back to the last time I went to the 9 Nights of Dancing, which is a festival of Durga, and the whole community turns up. They invite people who are not Hindus to come. I've been invited several times. It's been wonderful, and everyone gets up and dances, and they're all dancing the same way. It's organized and disorganized. The dance itself is the goddess. The dance is being with community. The joy that's in the room, the beauty of the music, everything. It's like someone put you in a jar and all your molecules went like this in the jar. And you know you're alive, and you know that you're alive, and you're dancing with the ancestors, and all of these things all at once. And it's just one experience from one of many rituals I've been part of, and that itself is a most extraordinary experience. And I think the whole I've always talked of myself as a syncretist animist, which I'm happy in a lot of different traditions. I can slip into any mode of worship, as long as I'm welcome, and as long as there are not those horrible prescriptions that are narrow. So that sort of knocks out most fundamentalist ends of things. But so whether I'm there or whether someone's invited me to the Vespers of the Ascension in an Eastern Orthodox church, whatever it is, my whole body responds to that. And I remember speaking of the Vespers of the Ascension, I went with a friend who was Orthodox, and I'd never been into an Orthodox church before. I didn't even know what people did in an Orthodox church. The music started. I had no idea what was going on. It was all in Church Slavonic. My body hit the ground. My body hit the ground. My knees hit the ground first. I couldn't do it now. And I prostrated myself. My whole body did that. I didn't. My mind had absolutely nothing to do with it. And my whole body was responding. And that to me is that sense of, we're all part of this. We're all one with this, whatever the experience that is coming out here. Whether I'm lying on the forest floor, whether I'm in a lake, whatever it is, all of that's happening all at the same time. And that is the wonder of life, and I will be a future ancestor. So it's like, so I'll still be part of it. It's the most wonderful belonging, I think, is what I would say. And I'm very pleased to see it going in this direction. But we've had so many people who have kept lighting the torches for us and leading us, and now our ancestors see that we're listening. Yeah, that's my sense, is that the ancestors, they can see we know how to make fire now again, and we can light our own, which is the trust of all traditions, which is that a lot of traditions have come to kindle us because we didn't have a fire. But to keep the fire going, we have to do local wooding. We can't send to India, we can't send to America to get firewood. We have to gather our wood where we are. Thank you.
Maybe a question related to the topic of responsibility. I mean, usually people obviously worship a goddess, but a goddess itself, it's not just a goddess, she also had responsibilities. You had Idun, who had the apples of immortality. You had fertility goddesses responsible for the land, for the harvest, and so on and so forth. When you talk about goddess or people saying, oh, I'm a goddess, and obviously it's clear you expect the worship, but what type of responsibility do you then take on for the community? And where's that aspect of not just getting yourself worship, but being responsible for a wider community? Where do you see that?
I'm thinking of my friend Diana Paxson, who very many years ago in the 70s, she's been the founder of lots of pagan and Norse tradition groups, but she's been giving a monthly ritual in the park for people to come and come close to the goddess since the late 70s in Berkeley. And people gather and everyone's welcome to join. But when her group decided that they wanted to be priestesses, there was no one to initiate them. And then they realized that if they self-initiated, they really would need to have some guidance. And so they came up together with 8 questions, which I think are quite relevant to us now. And this was asked of every person who went through that ritual to become a priestess, to be of service. And the questions went like this: will you serve the goddess for her glory and not for your gain? Will you remember that you are a channel and not the source of power? Will you continue to search for wisdom even when you seem to make little or no progress upon the path? There's that ignorance thing which we all have. Will you remember that any deed that you do may react upon the doer again? Will you give help when you can to whoever comes to you to learn? And will you hold all women as your sisters, all men as your brothers, and to look for the divine within them, even when they themselves have forgotten it, which is a very difficult one. Will you remember that your body is a temple of the gods, that your spirit is the voice of the goddess? Will you honor and listen to them? And will you remember that there are those who love you? Which I think is those just 8 perfect questions, which, thank you, Diana. She wrote this in a book that I edited many years ago. And those questions, I think, still hold very good for us, because they are ones that form personal responsibility for how it is we serve spiritually, however we do it, because we have lots of different roles, lots of very different ways that we serve. It's not for everyone to be an oracle. Not everybody wants to be the organizer. Not everyone wants to do this job or that job. But together we all fulfill our purpose in whatever way we are led. So, I think that stands as a very good guide to us.
Because I also think where it would break down, like if we really believe we are a goddess, and we are so 24/7, because human beings are constrained by the time-space continuum. We also have human needs to tend to, and families to raise, and jobs to do. And I think if I were to try it, and like I said, this is not a philosophy I subscribe to, I think I already feel that on a human level, I'm often not enough. I want to be the best teacher I can, the best mother I can for my children, and, a decent neighbor, and a good daughter-in-law for my mother-in-law with Alzheimer's. And I often already feel that, on many levels, like I'm not enough, holding all of that down and doing all of that with integrity. So if I truly were to not merge with a goddess and then return to my own life, but I were to be a full-time goddess, I think people could reasonably expect things of me that I, as a human being, could never deliver. And for that reason alone, I wouldn't want to try it on. But it seems to me it's kind of that if you really enter that as a lifestyle, you would so very quickly realize that you cannot meet the responsibility that that high office entails. That's my take.
And there's also that, that sense that those who teach us, have to have a basic humility. And I'm not quite sure how that can come into it if you're going to be the great goddess. It's going to be a bit difficult, isn't it? That, you know, you can always tell a good teacher, they don't know everything. They have faults and failings. They make mistakes. They mess up. But if you look at their students, that's a really good guide, because by their fruit you'll know them.
Yeah.
And poor teachers have people who don't show up on time, who don't deliver, people who have no coordination in their lives, and very little order. And that's sort of, if they have poor and unethical teaching, then they have no boundaries. So it's like, all these things. There's a kind of a job description, isn't there, for doing this work, which is that, if you're going to be in service spiritually, then, the job description kind of forms around you. And you know that there are things that you must do, and there are things that you must not do. And this is not to do with religious dogma or anything of that sort. It's just, these are the things that keep you true to the teaching, and they are inside us. And these things are really difficult to put over to people who live by particular laid down religious rules and customs, which for generations have been argued about and formulated. But these are the things that keep us on our path well. And there are certain things we know that don't serve us. I saw someone, a lovely person the other day, who had, she said, a bit of a questionable training, and was not clear that the people who had the teaching of her really knew entirely what they were doing. But she knew inside herself that some of the things that they were saying and doing were not for her. And so, I mean, like all magical groups the world over, and all women's groups and all associations and societies the world over, if you don't like it, you leave it. You vote with your feet, and you find a place, even if it's by yourself to begin with, but you find others. And by actually leaving that group, suddenly a whole lot of windows open, and some doors that you can suddenly go and meet some other people, and find other ways of being. So I think these happen in everything we've ever done. I mean, I've been in more magical groups than you've had hot dinners, as they say. And a lot of them I left. And I still regard them as good learning experiences, although they were very painful and troublesome at the time. So part of the responsibility is to do that. Yeah,
I would also say that whatever you're not getting right, and I'm not talking about ideology, but there is a kind of a rightness to spiritual things and handling spiritual material. And, whatever I do not get right on an individual level, I very quickly realized it when I'm put as a teacher with a group of people, because, you know, you get like, you know, the hall of mirrors, I sometimes call it. So whatever I personally am not getting right becomes amplified by like students not getting it right. And there's this huge mirror held up where you very soon think like, oh, oops, I need to do that differently next time, or I didn't give the right instructions, or I need to choose different words, or, you know, or whatever it might be, put different boundaries around it. So, you know, without going into doctrine or dogma or having a book that prescribes everything, I don't have a book that tells me how to teach, but I've certainly observed that the boundaries or the things that I didn't handle right or set right immediately came to bite me on the behind. And I was pretty much forced for my own survival to do it differently next time. So, you know, if you're like humble enough and you have self-awareness, like the process is the greatest teacher. You know, I think the, you know, sort of kind of the truth will out, if that's not the truth, is a very tricky word to use, but like you quickly discover if you're doing it right or not. You know, the process will teach you.
And I think also, because I know we're coming near the end, something I think this is really important, that when we don't know what to do, when we're really in a bad place, then it's like, you know, I say this to all my students until I'm blue in the face, you know, this is in 8-foot block capitals, I always say to them, so listen. It's like, if you need help, ask for the help that you need. Ask for the help that you need. And human beings are very poor at doing that, I have to say. But it's like a web search, you know, if you want to look up something, you have to ask a very exact frame of a question or a very exact thing, because if you just type in cars, you know, you'll die in the rush of the information coming your way. You know, if you want a 1963 Aston Martin with yellow trim, you know, you put that in, and it only goes down to like 60,000 rather than 600 billion, and you can find what you do. But that just approaching the universe with, please give me what I need now. Please help me now. Please may a door or a window open for me now, however, whatever words you say. Or in the words of John Masefield, who made the most beautiful prayer, "O greatness hear, O brightness hark, leave us not little, nor yet dark." You know, if you don't know anything, you don't know who you're talking to, it doesn't matter. If you just apply to the universe, the help is near to hand always, even though it might not come from the place you think it's going to come.
Yeah.
And that happens every day, every day.
Mm.
I think the loneliness that we've all been in, and the sense of abandonment that many are still in, you know, that we also can open the door. It's not just, you know, no one's contacting me. I'm not aware of anything happening. It's like, you also have to look. I'll just say that, because I think we don't say that often enough.
I think sometimes it might also be the ego that we don't want to ask for help or so, isn't it? Because we don't, it makes us vulnerable if we ask for help, obviously. And I think ego is another aspect, because when you look at a lot of spirituality, it's about transcendent the ego or trying to calm down the ego, whereas obviously goddesses, they have a quite well-defined ego, I would say, in most of the pantheons when you look at it. So obviously being a goddess would mean to really live out your ego. Serving a goddess means to put your ego down to serve something higher than yourself, isn't it? So I think that role of the ego also is quite important here.
Yeah, but I think the ego is a lot to do with boundaries as well, you know. And I've taught practitioner trainings, you always get some people are so enthusiastic where they say, oh, you're teaching about entering an altered state of consciousness, like a non-egoic state. I'm going to live my whole life like that. And I always say, no. Because, you know, if you're in a non-egoic state, you're not going to pay your bills, you're not going to have boundaries, you're not going to, like, your relationships are not going to go right, you know, your children are going to climb all over you. So actually, you know, the ego gets a very bad rep, but it serves a desperately important function. So, like, I'm not saying that it doesn't have a place in our spirituality. We just need to be aware of, you need to make a distinction between how and when it needs to serve us and when it's time to take a step away from it. But it absolutely has a place. And I would certainly say that, the Norse gods are not without ego. They have very particular, tastes and habits and, like all sorts of things go on. So that's a very interesting reflection, Christian. I'll actually think about that some more. Thank you for that, please. Or was that you, or was that from a participant?
No, that was me.
It was you. I thought so. It sounded a bit Christian.
We've opened a lot of can of worms tonight.
Well, yeah, it was going to be the night for it.
A lot of wriggling still.
Yeah. Do we have like a final question, or we have a few more minutes? Is there more in your box, Christian?
I don't have any in my box, so does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask a final question before we wrap it up?
Wave first, so we don't get 10 people speaking at the same time.
I can't see.
Catherine,
Go on there, I see you. Go, go, go.
Were you waving, Catherine, or not? Yeah, so unmute.
I just wanted to make a brief reflection, really, to say how deeply grateful I am to have been one of your students, Imelda, for such a long time, and feel like that's given me a structure within myself that feels so robust, the structure that I'm so confident in, even when I might not have that confidence in myself. And I was invited last year. There were two wonderful musicians, and they were doing, they were offering a kind of, it was an experience, an immersive experience called The Voices of Hecate. And they'd they recorded the ambient sounds of Pendle Hill and of Mother Shipton's cave, but they wanted me to open the space. And it was a great honor for me to do this, and it was actually in a church. So I opened the space, and then I was immersed in the beautiful sounds, and I closed the space. But straight after that, so I'd have done a lot of protection work and real honouring of Hecate, the space, the ancestors. But as soon as I'd closed down the space, I had to ring home to check that my children were all right. And actually, one of them wasn't. He was already moaning for me to get some takeaway chips for him. And I feel like that's the perfect kind of illustration of, I went from holding such a sacred space, all candlelit, deeply kind of otherworldly, to having to try to see if I could get some takeaway chips for my child. And I think that's why we can't, we're in service to the goddess. We are not the goddess. And I do see these people in their Instagram bio, this, that, and the other, and goddess. And that's not for me, but I think that's because I've been very well taught. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Well, I just want to thank everyone. Thank Christian for hosting us tonight, and for Imelda for suggesting this conversation, which I think has been great. It kind of feels like a part one in some strange way, that there might be others that come along where we sort of haven't got to the, why is this happening in great detail, or to speak with those to whom it's happening. That would have been also very interesting. But, so let's just thank all who've been here, and we thank all the goddesses of wisdom, all those divinities and spirits who have the overseeing of us, for all their care and their insight, and all their poking, because they poke us a lot as well, which is very good for us sometimes, especially when we're walking in the wrong direction. So, which is great. So please keep doing that. We will keep listening, and may all of us receive the blessing and the joy that comes from being in service to those beings whom we love and who guide us and who came to us when we were very young. some of us. And for those who found them afterwards were no less dear. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Catherine.
you. So great. So thank you all very much for coming. And I think that this is going to be available as a recording for you all. So if you wanted to listen back to any parts of it or didn't quite catch something, you can. And it will be eventually on your website.
In a month's time, no, not my website, it'll go on my YouTube
On your YouTube, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Great. Over to you, Christian.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, Kathleen. Thank you, Imelda, for that wonderful talk. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for your questions. And yeah, I hope everybody is taking something with you for pondering over. And yeah, seeing how, I think the stone has been thrown into the water. Now let's see where the ripples will be seen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.